Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're going to be taking a close look at Chapter 5 from the Meditations of a Christian Saint. And this chapter really gets into human vulnerability and how these vulnerabilities can be like a starting point for incredible growth.
Yeah.
And it's all kind of tied to this idea of living saints.
Yeah.
People who embody selflessness and devotion, living, right here among us. Not historical figures or anything.
And it really challenges that traditional view of sainthood.
Yeah.
That it's not about waiting for, recognition after death.
Right.
But that it's about actively cultivating these virtues in our everyday lives, with all our flaws and everything.
Yeah. And the chapter starts out with a pretty stark, reality check.
Yeah.
We all have a limited active lifespan. The book says it's 70 years.
About that.
And even then, a lot of that time is spent growing up and then eventually declining.
Yeah.
Does that resonate with you at all?
It is certainly a sobering thought, but the book doesn't present it as a reason to despair,
Right.
It's more like this awareness of limited time is a source of motivation.
Okay.
It's a call to make the most of every moment.
Right.
And to act with courage and resilience,
Yeah.
Knowing that our time is precious.
That's a great perspective. It's okay, we have this limited time, so let's make it count. And the book then connects this idea of limited time to the concept of living saints.
Mm-hmm.
It says that saints aren't superhuman.
Right.
They face the same vulnerabilities as everyone else, but they choose to act despite them.
Right.
And what I thought was really interesting was how the chapter then kind of goes into the complex world of emotions.
Yeah, it describes emotions as both a beautiful and potentially treacherous part of human nature.
Okay.
It uses this really powerful metaphor of a stormy sea to highlight how emotions can be a source of great beauty and power, but they can also overwhelm us if we're not careful.
I love that. I love that analogy.
Yeah.
Because, we've all felt those waves of emotion that can feel totally out of control sometimes.
Yeah.
So how do we navigate this? How do we navigate this stormy sea? What does the book say about that?
Well, it emphasizes the importance of emotional intelligence.
Okay.
And it presents that as a key trait of a living saint.
Okay.
It's not just about understanding and managing our own emotions.
Yeah.
It's also about empathizing with others.
Right.
The book suggests that true strength lies not in suppressing our emotions,
Right.
but in harnessing them for good.
It makes me think about historical figures.
Yeah.
Like Nelson Mandela, who faced unimaginable hardship,
Right.
but emerged with such grace and forgiveness.
Yeah.
It really makes you think about the power of emotional intelligence and how we can all cultivate it.
Right.
And building on this idea of navigating challenges, the chapter then goes on to discuss physical limitations, things like disease, injury, and just the aging process.
It uses a really striking example, talking about how even though a broken bone might heal, the scar remains.
Okay.
It acknowledges the resilience of the human body, but also its inherent fragility.
Yeah.
We heal, but those experiences leave their mark.
It's a beautiful way of putting it, showing that we all carry these vulnerabilities with us.
Right.
But the chapter goes even deeper than physical limitations, right?
Mm-hmm.
It touches on the idea of limited knowledge, susceptibility to manipulation, and even what it calls the unseen identity of a man.
Yes, it does. And this is where the chapter gets really thought-provoking.
Yeah.
It connects these vulnerabilities, limited knowledge, susceptibility to manipulation, to the need for education, critical thinking, and spiritual growth.
Okay.
It seems to be arguing that by expanding our knowledge, questioning assumptions, and deepening our connection to something bigger than ourselves,
Right.
we become less vulnerable to those external forces.
It's like strengthening our internal defenses, our minds and spirits, so we can better navigate the complexities of the world. And I love how it emphasizes that even with the loss of physical attributes, there's an unseen identity that persists.
Exactly. And the book goes on to talk about how our social environment shapes us, the societies we live in,
Right.
for better or for worse.
Yeah.
It specifically mentions technology and AI expressing concern about the potential for manipulation and control as we become increasingly reliant on these systems.
That's such a relevant point.
It is.
It really makes you stop and think about how much of who we are is shaped by these external influences.
Right.
Are we truly as independent as we think we are?
Yeah.
Or are we more products of our environment, our technology, than we realize?
It's a question worth considering, and it leads us to another key point that the book raises. How do we navigate these complexities ethically?
Right.
How can we use technology for good while safeguarding ourselves against its potential downsides?
Right.
And more importantly,
Right.
how do these ideas relate to becoming a living saint? And that's what we're going to explore next as we dive into the specific strategies the chapter outlines
Sounds good.
for overcoming these vulnerabilities.
Okay.
Welcome back to our deep dive into Chapter 5 of the Meditations of a Christian Saint. We've been talking about all the ways humans are vulnerable.
Yeah, like a lot of ways.
Right. But now the chapter kind of shifts gears to something much more like empowering, Like, okay, we get it. Life is tough.
Right.
We're all, messed up in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
But now what do we do about it?
Right. Like, what are the solutions?
Exactly. And thankfully, the chapter doesn't leave us hanging.
Okay, guys.
It lays out some really practical advice on how we can overcome these vulnerabilities.
Okay.
And move towards a life that's more aligned with those like living saint qualities.
I like it. So, like, what's the first step?
Well, the first strategy it emphasizes is self-awareness.
Okay.
And that might sound really simple.
Yeah.
But the book argues that it's like the foundation for everything else.
Okay.
You can't really make any real progress. Right.
If you don't understand both your strengths and your weaknesses.
Yeah. It reminds me of that old saying,
Yeah.
know thyself.
Right. Exactly.
But the book takes it a step further.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just about knowing our good qualities.
Yeah.
It's about being honest with ourselves about those not so great tendencies.
Totally. It's about like acknowledging the shadow side of ourselves.
It was hard.
It is. It takes courage to look inward and admit where we struggle.
Right.
But that's precisely where growth begins.
And you have to keep doing it right.
Yeah. Self-awareness is not like a one-time thing. It's
Yeah.
an ongoing practice.
So you have to constantly check in with yourself.
Exactly. It's about being mindful of our thoughts, our feelings, and our actions.
Okay, so once we have a grasp of our, weaknesses, what's the next step?
Okay, so the next step the chapter highlights is the power of education and knowledge.
Okay.
It actually quotes a passage from the Bible, Hosea 4.6,
Okay.
which says, "My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge."
Wow. That's pretty intense. It is. It shows how crucial knowledge and learning is.
Right, like knowledge is power.
Exactly. But it goes beyond just acquiring information.
Yeah.
It's also about developing critical thinking skills.
Okay.
Like, we can't just blindly accept information.
Right.
We have to question it.
Yeah.
Especially today with so much misinformation out there.
Right, yeah. It's important to be discerning
It is.
and figure out what's true.
Mm.
And speaking of navigating complex situations, the chapter also talks about financial literacy.
Yeah, like being informed about budgeting, investing, wealth creation.
Yeah, all that.
It empowers us to make good decisions
Right.
and secure our future.
So it's like taking control of our finances so we're not vulnerable.
Exactly.
So we've got self-awareness, education, financial literacy.
Right.
What other tools does the chapter give us?
Next up is emotional intelligence.
Okay.
Remember that stormy sea metaphor?
Yeah.
It's like emotional intelligence is our compass and rudder to guide us through those rough waters.
I like that. So it's like learning to ride the waves instead of being tossed around by them.
Yeah.
Like recognizing that even though emotions are powerful,
Right.
we have a choice in how we respond.
Exactly. It's not about ignoring our emotions.
Right.
It's about understanding them, managing them, and using them as strength.
Okay, so how do we develop this emotional intelligence? Like, are there practices or something?
That's a great question, and one we want you to think about as you continue reading.
Okay.
While the book doesn't give step-by-step instructions, it does offer some clues.
Okay.
One practice it really emphasizes is resilience,
Okay.
that ability to bounce back from setbacks and challenges.
Because life is full of challenges.
It is.
So how do we develop that inner strength to keep going when things are tough?
The chapter mentions a few things like developing coping mechanisms,
Okay.
seeking support when needed,
Right.
and reframing setbacks as opportunities for growth.
Okay, so it's not about avoiding challenges.
Right.
It's about learning and growing from them. And the chapter also talked about physical fitness.
It does,
Yeah.
but it reminds us that physical training is important,
Mm-hmm.
but spiritual growth is even more important.
So it's about like balancing taking care of our bodies and our spirits.
Exactly.
And that makes me think about mindfulness and stress management.
Right. The author highlights a lot of practices for a sound mind.
Like what?
Things like getting enough rest,
Oh,
practicing gratitude, doing breathing exercises,
okay.
reading scripture,
Okay.
even like keeping a clean living space.
Wow. So it's like making conscious choices that support our well-being.
Exactly.
And the chapter also talks about the importance of social support. Right?
It does. It says we're not meant to go through life alone.
Yeah.
Having friends, family, mentors can help us through challenges.
Like having a team of cheerleaders.
Right.
But the chapter also talks about those bigger challenges we face as a society, right?
It does things like the crazy pace of technology and the uncertainty of the future.
Yeah, like how do we adapt and thrive in a world that's constantly changing?
Well, the book encourages us to embrace a mindset of adaptation and innovation,
Oh.
like by staying curious,
Yeah.
continuously learning, and being willing to adapt.
Yeah, okay.
We can not only survive, but thrive.
So it's not about clinging to the old ways of doing things.
Right.
It's about being open to new ideas.
Exactly.
And the chapter also talks about the importance of healthcare and preventative measures.
That's right, like prioritizing our health,
Yeah.
getting regular checkups, living a healthy lifestyle.
Right.
It's about being proactive instead of waiting for things to go wrong.
And it mentions hard work and dedication too,
Yeah,
right?
like achieving our goals requires effort.
Yeah.
The book encourages us to embrace hard work,
Okay.
be dedicated to our pursuits,
Mm-hmm.
and to mind our own business.
What does that mean?
It means focusing on our own endeavors
Okay.
instead of meddling in the affairs of others.
Oh, okay.
It leads to a higher quality of life.
So it's about staying focused on our goals.
Right.
And being ethical.
Right. Absolutely. The chapter emphasizes strong moral principles.
Okay.
Aligning our actions with our values.
Right. So living a life that reflects our beliefs.
Exactly.
But how do we know if we're on the right track?
The chapter encourages a mindset of continuous improvement.
Okay.
Always be looking for opportunities to learn and grow.
So it's like a lifelong journey of self-discovery.
It is.
And it all ties back to this idea of living saints.
Yeah.
It's not about being perfect.
Right.
It's about striving to embody those virtues.
And as we've talked about all these strategies,
Yes.
they're not just about individual growth. It's about building a better world.
Welcome back to the deep dive.
Yeah.
We've been talking about Chapter 5 of the Meditations of a Christian Saint.
Yeah, exploring all those human vulnerabilities.
And the different ways we can try to overcome them.
And the chapter doesn't just, leave us with a list of tools or techniques. It ends with like this really powerful message of hope and resilience.
Okay, so like what does it say?
Well, it reminds us that acknowledging our weaknesses isn't about wallowing in despair.
Right.
It's about recognizing our shared humanity, our capacity for growth, and our potential for greatness.
Even with all our flaws and everything.
Exactly, like with all our imperfections.
The author seems to be saying that it's in those moments of vulnerability, when we confront our limitations, that we discover our true strength.
It's about finding the courage to be honest with ourselves,
Right.
about where we fall short,
Yeah.
and then using that as like a springboard for transformation.
It's like those cracks in a broken pot,
Yeah.
that allow the light to shine through.
I like that.
It's those imperfections that make us unique
Right.
and give us character.
Yeah, and by embracing them, we
Right.
open ourselves up to more self-acceptance and compassion.
And that self-acceptance,
Yeah.
that willingness to acknowledge where we need to grow
Yeah.
becomes like the foundation for real change.
It does.
But there's something the book doesn't really address
Okay.
that I've been thinking about.
What's that?
What if like the biggest obstacle to self-awareness,
Okay.
to overcoming our weaknesses, is the stories we tell ourselves?
That's interesting. What do you mean?
Like what if those internal narratives,
Okay.
the beliefs we have about who we are
Right.
and what we're capable of,
Yeah.
are actually the things that are holding us back?
It's like we can have all the knowledge, all the tools, but if we're constantly telling ourselves, I'm not good enough,
Yeah.
or I'll never change,
Right.
then we're just creating our own limitations.
Yeah, it's like we need to become aware of those stories and then challenge them.
Like ask ourselves, is this story really helping me?
Right.
Or is it holding me back?
So maybe the first step is to like rewrite the narrative.
Yeah.
Start telling ourselves a different story.
A story that empowers us.
One that reflects who we really are.
Beings capable of love, resilience, transformation.
That's a powerful thought.
It is.
So as you continue on your journey,
Yeah.
think about the stories you're telling yourself.
Are they stories of limitation or possibility?
And if you find yourself stuck in a story that's not serving you,
Yeah.
remember, you have the power to change it.
You can rewrite the script.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the Meditations of a Christian Saint. We hope you learned something
And that it inspired you.
to start your own journey of growth.
Yeah.
We'll see you next time.